It's time for Lefties Losing It. In recent weeks, we have heard so much about fractures on the right, about the MAGA base being divided, about Trump losing support among Republicans. It's times like this I like to check in with CNN's polling expert, Harry Enten. How bad is it, Harry? Is the president losing Republicans?
No. Look, this is still Donald Trump's Republican Party, and we can see it here. It's like a rock, to quote Bob Seger. I mean, take a look here. Republicans who approve of Trump. 6 months ago, it was 87%. Now, well, hello, it's the same number. It's 87%. He has not lost any support among Republicans compared to 6 months ago. As I said at the beginning, he's like a rock. He's like a rock. The Republican base is sticking by Donald Trump at this point in time.
That's fascinating, Harry. I wonder how it compares to other recent presidents. Now, this next bit is likely to upset our sensitive lefty viewers, so perhaps, I don't know, go off and make a cup of tea, yes?
Donald Trump, if you look at 21st-century presidents' own party approval at this point in term two, who leads the pack? It's Donald John Trump. 87% of Republicans approve of Donald John Trump. You go back to 2013, 78% of Democrats supported Barack Obama, and it was 78% of Republicans who supported George W. Bush back in 2005 at this point. So Donald Trump has the biggest highest own party approval of any president who served their entire second term in the 21st century.
That was fun. Now let's check out some tolerant lefties being delightfully inclusive and kind when met with someone who may have a differing view to them. Of course, they immediately resort to threats and violence.
How's that? Whoa. You just hit me with the sign, right?
A lot of this security has weapons. You should get the out of here.
What are you going to do?
You're a nobody. You're a nobody. You're a little cuck nobody, and so are you.
Are you going to use weapons?
No. We might. We might. You want to find out?
You got cops right over there. Nobody.
Do you support that message?
Nobody, Ben.
I support you leaving.
We're not going to leave.
Oh, can't you just feel the love? Such well-balanced and compassionate people.
Okay, so he is dragging Trump and ICE officials, law enforcement. Excuse me, ma'am. Do you support this? What? They are dragging the president. What happened?
I said you're a Nazi, kid.
How am I a Nazi?
He's a troll.
Real inclusive. Really inclusive.
You know, the left doesn't just have a violence problem, that much is clear. They also have a racism problem. The open hostility towards white people, particularly white men, the unrepentant racism has been normalised for far too long. This next woman speaks without fear of being labelled a hideous racist because she's heard this sort of toxic rhetoric everywhere.
Charlie Kirk. Like, I'm glad the guy's dead, actually. So,
you're glad he's dead?
Yeah, I'm glad. White men are literally the single greatest threat to humans being fed, housed, clothed, having their basic needs. White men are the greatest threat to that.
Well, I don't see any problems.
Because you're a white man!
Well, you're also unable to name me an example, right?
The example is you having the privilege to even be out here.
Now, you'll remember Donald Trump and New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani having a very civilised, polite get-together in the White House. Well, the lefties lost it after that because Zohran didn't attack the president in the way they would have liked. So, like a good little coward, he's now gone back to calling President Trump a fascist. He's gone from this.
Are you affirming that you think President Trump is a fascist?
I've spoken about...
That's okay. You can just say yes. Okay. It's easier. It's easier than explaining it. I don't mind.
Yep, he's gone from that to now claiming that he in fact answered yes to that question and he does see Donald Trump as a fascist.
Mr. Mayor-elect, just to be very clear, do you think that President Trump is a fascist?
And after President Trump said that, I said yes. And
so you do?
And that's something that I've said in the past. I say it today. And
you've also said in the past that President Trump has engaged in a, quote, attack on our democracy. You've called him a despot. Do you still believe President Trump is a threat to the democracy?
Everything that I've said in the past, I continue to believe.
Pathetic, Zoran. Absolutely pathetic. Now, let's have a look at some of the entitled antics of protesters who are helping to destroy the profitability of businesses that cooperate with immigration and customs enforcement, ICE. Businesses that simply comply with the law. Watch these idiot lefties lining up to buy 17-cent ice scrapers at Home Depot, then returning them and then buying them, which essentially stops anyone else, like real customers, being able to shop at Home Depot.
What are you buying? An ice scraper. Nice. What are you guys buying?
We are buying
Ice scrapers.
Let's bring in documentary filmmaker and commentator Ami Horowitz. Ami, no shock that those scenes are from California. This would be costing affected businesses a fortune.
Yeah, California, my home state. Oh, I'm so proud. By the way, did I hear that right? The ice scrapers are 17 cents. Well, obviously, it's in California. There is no ice. I looked at my local store. I heard about this. They're $2.99. So, yeah, I would have gotten a line for them also. Just wouldn't have returned them. They're too good a deal. Look, for them, this is a twofer, right? Which means, like, on the one hand, they get to do two things at one time, right? They get to protest the fascism of Trump, right? And the ICE raids, and at the same time also help to take down capitalism. So for them, it was a 2-for-1 deal. You know, the right never does this, right? When we have, obviously, the right has issues with the left, issues with different governments, in the city governments, state governments. President was on the left just last year. But we didn't do this thing. We didn't disrupt commerce. We didn't disrupt people's lives. We didn't go to people's homes. That's not the way the right does business. And by the way, I don't know if you saw that in the clip, but they had 24 white crosses to basically saying that there are 24 people who died in ICE custody since Donald Trump. Well, as you know, Rita, I'm a data guy. I don't just let that go. I go into the numbers. I go into the weeds. I did it with this also because that didn't seem right to me. And yeah, indeed, there were between 20 and 24 deaths. But yeah, not exactly in ICE custody. I'm talking, the people that died were actually mostly in hospitals where the U.S. government was actually trying to treat them for underlying conditions. They died in the hospital. Some of them were suicides. But of course, let's not let the truth get in the way of the narrative of the left, right? And, you know, I want to point out another thing, that Home Depot, they're not involved in these ICE raids. They don't coordinate with the U.S. government. They went to great pains to say, we have nothing to do with this. But of course, the left doesn't care about the truth, doesn't care about that. And I'll just add one last thing about this, Rita. Look, as you know, we've talked about illegal immigration for years on the show. And I'm going to take a backseat to no one on how I wanted to stop illegal immigration and get rid of illegals in this country. But it's also a very bad look. Okay, when you run into Home Depot and grabbing people off the parking lot or trying to get jobs, it's one of the reasons, just from an optics perspective, it's one of the reasons why there's been a degradation in support of Donald Trump with the Latino community, which in no small way put him over the top. So I think also one has to look at the politics of this, and it doesn't look good.
It doesn't, but if you want to have mass deportations, you're going to have to do that. It's not. There's no nice way of going about this. There's no way where you're going to be able to deport people who are in the country illegally without scenes that are like that and they're sometimes emotional and hard to witness. But it's what he was elected on. He has a mandate to do it. But, let's stick with law and order. There's been another shocking, unprovoked, violent attack on public transport with a young woman set alight by someone who looks to be a career criminal. And people are drawing comparisons with this case with the horrific murder of Irina Zarutska, whose brutal stabbing was caught on video. The 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee was killed by someone who should have been behind bars. And that is also the case with this latest attack where 26-year-old Bethany McGee was set on fire on a Chicago L train, allegedly by Lawrence Reed. Now, this is a man with 72 prior arrests. His name's Reed, and he's now facing terrorism charges. But incredibly, Army, the judge initially overruled a request from prosecutors to have Reed locked up. I mean, this man should have been behind bars. This attack should have never happened. Thankfully, Bethany has survived the attack, but she has suffered horrific injuries.
Yeah, grievous, terrible injuries that may follow her for the rest of her life, unfortunately. Another example of blue city failures on crime, and I think that we have been facing in New York City and will be facing, obviously, acutely with Zohran Mamdani. 72 times being arrested. Rita, I can't think of something I've ever done 72 times at all in my life. That's a lot of arrests. And by the way, more than that, he broke probation over a dozen times. Just so you understand, when you break probation once, you're supposed to go back to jail immediately, okay? But it goes back, remember that the whole bail discussion we had, that video I shot just a couple weeks ago, we talked about it. It's so fascinating because if you remember in that video, I was asking people, do you think your criminal history should be part of how the judge looks at what your sentencing will be? The answer is obviously yes, right? I mean, what else are you going to go by? But the left refuses to do that. This is an example, of that video coming to life where the judge themselves are saying, I'm not going to take their criminal history into account. It's unbelievable. And by the way, this idea of setting people ablaze on our city's transport systems, this is not an isolated incident at all. In fact, I was looking at it. In the last 12 months, Rita, 5 people in Chicago and New York alone were set on fire in those transit. 5 people, Rita, okay? This is an epidemic, okay? No, you can't. This is unbelievable. And look, this is also, I want to point out, really a mental health crisis also. And I think it's an example. I've said for years that I hate to say it, but we know that a lot of these crimes are committed by people with mental health. I think we need to go back. It was Reagan who actually deinstitutionalized mental health criminals. And I think we have to reinstitutionalize people. I don't think we have a choice. And lastly, I'll talk about Brandon Johnson, the absolute and utter failure of a mayor. His response to this was unbelievable. He was talking about how, first of all, this is an isolated incident, untrue. Crime is up massively in the Chicago Transit Authority. And I was talking about how he's trying to make Chicago one of the safest big cities in the country. Yeah, total fail. Chicago is 3 times the national homicide average. And by the way, has a higher homicide average than Medellin, Colombia. So sorry, Brandon Johnson, that's just not the case.
He is amongst the worst mayors in America, and that's saying something. Army, before you go, President Donald Trump signed an executive order earlier today that designates chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood as foreign terrorist organisations. The Muslim Brotherhood is a Sunni Islamist organisation founded in Egypt back in 1928, and the White House argues this designation will help the US combat the group's transnational network, which is set to fuel terrorism against US interests and allies in the Middle East. Army, is there going to be much resistance to this move by Donald Trump? Surely the Democrats aren't going to side with the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah. First of all, I spent over a year researching and interviewing members of the Muslim Brotherhood around the world. I went to Cairo and Istanbul and Beirut, Germany, and I met with dozens of Muslim Brotherhood leaders and lay people around the world. And I can tell you it's one of the most dangerous organizations that exists. So kudos to the president for designating them. I'm asking and pushing this for years as a terrorist organization. As far as your question when it comes to the left, they're going to cry foul on this. Of course they are. The Muslim Brotherhood was telling me that they have co-opted the left. Like that was part of their strategy. And they, of course, adopt the language of the left. They talk about victimhood and colonization, right, and occupation. These are all things that they use. They know that the left kind of is attracted to that. And the left has been, for the most part, supportive. The left makes arguments for them, saying they're not a political organization, they're a religious organization. You can't go after them. You can't attack them. While they are those things, and by the way, so is organizations like Hamas, but their main point of business is terror. Like Hamas, and I mentioned Hamas a couple of times because Hamas is a direct offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Qaeda is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. There are almost a dozen terrorist organizations across the world that consider themselves part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Their slogan is "Jihad is the way," and dying for Allah is the greatest good. That's their slogan. This is not me saying this. This is them saying this about themselves. They're incredibly dangerous. And by the way, they have really spent a lot of time and effort in Europe and the United States. The largest Islamic organizations in the U.S., CARE, the student organizations, are part of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. And also, very dangerously, they are really involved in the jails. Most people who convert to Islam in the jails do it under the auspices of the Muslim Brotherhood, and 35 to 40,000 people a year are converting to Islam in our jails. And the latest estimates are that 15% of the total population of jails are actually Muslim, and it's a direct response directly because
fascinating.
The Muslim Brotherhood has been converting them. Yeah,
that is fascinating. Army Horowitz, thank you so much for those insights.